My name is Rachel Ferris, and last Christmas was the day I finally understood what betrayal wrapped in tinsel looks like. It was snowing that morning, the kind of soft, glittering snowfall you only see in postcards or overly sentimental movies. My windshield wipers were barely keeping up, but I remember thinking, maybe this year will feel different. Maybe they would surprise me with something close to warmth. I should have known better. The house was lit up like a catalog cover, golden lights tracing the eaves, a massive wreath on the door, and two inflatable reindeer posted proudly on either side of the porch. My mother had always been meticulous about appearances. Inside, the scent of cinnamon rolls and fireplace smoke drifted into the air, and for a brief second, it almost smelled like childhood. But the moment I stepped in, I knew something was wrong. Everyone was already there. My sister Marla, her husband Derek, their oversugared twins. My brother Eric, arms draped lazily around his new fiancé. Even my mother, wearing the same wine-colored dress she wore every Christmas morning, was there, seated comfortably, a mimosa in hand. And me? I was an afterthought. Rachel, my mother chirped, rising to give me a tight hug that smelled more like forced cheer than genuine affection. You made it. We thought maybe you wouldn't. I said I'd be here, I replied, slipping out of my coat. Oh, well, you know how busy you get, she said with a clipped laugh. I glanced at the coffee table. Wrapping paper already littered the carpet. Stockings had been emptied. Breakfast was half-eaten. They hadn't waited for me. That's when it started. The little realizations. The quick cuts disguised as family chatter. Oh, we didn't think you'd want to do gifts this year. You've been so busy with work. I figured you'd be too tired to help decorate. I wasn't sure you even still liked peppermint cocoa, Rachel. Each sentence was an excuse. Each excuse was a thread being snipped, gentle, polite, and deliberate. Finally, Mom stood, clinking her glass. Before we go to the next round of presents, I want to share something special. She beamed at Eric and placed a small red box in his lap. He opened it and pulled out a key. My heart stopped. You're giving him the lake cabin? I asked, trying to sound curious instead of devastated. Mom smiled. Well, your father would have wanted it to stay in the family. And Eric's thinking of starting a family soon. It just made sense. But Dad told me my voice caught. He told me he wanted me to have it. The room went quiet for just a second too long. Marla cleared her throat and took a sip of cider. Eric looked down. Mom straightened her shoulders. Well, sweetheart, people say a lot of things before they pass. But legally, the house was mine to give. She turned back to Eric. Besides, Rachel's always been so independent. That cabin wouldn't suit her. That was the moment I knew. They hadn't forgotten me. They'd erased me. On purpose. The rest of the day was a blur. I don't remember what I said. I don't remember what else was unwrapped. I only remember sitting there, holding a paper cup of lukewarm coffee while they talked over me, about renovations, future grandkids, New Year's Eve plans like I didn't exist. I stayed long enough to avoid causing a scene. And then I left without saying goodbye. Back at my apartment, I sat on the floor, staring at the snow globe I'd received, my only gift. Inside it was a tiny wooden cabin nestled among fake trees. Sparkling snow drifted lazily down over the roof, and a tiny plaque on the base read, "Home is where the heart forgives." I almost laughed. Because this heart? It wasn't forgiving anything. Not this time. The next morning, I opened my eyes to silence. No texts. No missed calls. No apologies. Not even a passive-aggressive emoji from Marla, which was how she usually communicated guilt. The snow globe still sat on my kitchen counter. It looked so harmless in the morning light, like a well-meaning gift from someone who hadn't meant to break me. But the more I looked at it, the more I felt like it wasn't a present, it was a message. A carefully wrapped way of saying, we gave your place away. And we dressed it in snow. I hadn't slept much. My mind kept replaying the look on my mother's face as she handed Eric that key. Not cold. Not angry. Just satisfied. Like she'd orchestrated something behind the curtain and now watched the performance unfold exactly as she'd written it. And I was just a forgotten extra. But not anymore. I sat down with my father's old documents. I'd kept them all, even the ones no one thought I had. The copy of his original will. A letter he wrote to me the year before he died. Even the property deed tucked into a manila folder, back when it was still in his name. He'd never formally updated his will to include the cabin transfer. At least not legally. But he wrote it in his own handwriting, and I still remembered the night he signed it. We were sitting on the back deck of that very cabin. He was tired. His hands shook. "This place is yours, Ray," he'd whispered. "Not because of inheritance. Because of everything you endured in this family, and still stayed soft." I had stayed soft. Too soft. Until now. I scanned the documents for anything useful. Loopholes. Discrepancies. Then I found it, a recorded note he'd made with a local attorney friend. Informal, but detailed, stating his clear intent to leave the property to me. It had never been filed, but it had a date, a witness, and a signature. I wasn't a lawyer, but I knew someone who was. Her name was Camille, and we'd gone to college together. We hadn't spoken in years, but she'd built a reputation as a quiet shark, someone who didn't posture, didn't threaten, but made people regret underestimating her. I sent her an email. Nothing dramatic. Just, "Hey, I have something you might want to look at. Can we talk?" She responded within 2 hours. "Call me. This smells like an inheritance grab." And it was. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just stood by the window, watching the snow fall across the city's skyline, and felt something inside me harden. Not bitterness. Not revenge. Clarity. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't going to ask them to see me. I was going to make them. Camille met me in a small, quiet cafe in Midtown. She wore all black, carried a sleek leather folder, and had the kind of no-nonsense posture that made people move out of her way without realizing it. She gave me one look and said, "You've been holding this in for years, haven't you?" I didn't even try to deny it. We talked for over 2 hours. I laid out everything. The cabin, my father's unfiled will, the way my family bypassed every conversation that could have acknowledged my place. Camille listened like a surgeon prepping for surgery, calm, calculated, exact. She took my documents home and promised to run a full review. "If there's even one legal opening," she said, "I'll find it." That evening, I drove past the cabin. I hadn't been there in over 2 years. The gravel driveway was buried under snow, the mailbox tilted slightly, still with our family name, Ferris, carved into the side. But it wasn't mine anymore. Not on paper. And that had to change. I stepped out of the car and just stood there in the cold, breathing in the sharp winter air. The silence wrapped around me like a question. Why now? Why fight this? Why not just walk away? Because it wasn't about the cabin. Not really. It was about everything that had led to this. Every time they told me I was too emotional. Every time they said I was dramatic for needing space. Every time they praised Eric for being stable and called me unavailable because I had boundaries. They had never seen me as equal, only as tolerable, until I stopped tolerating them. Back home, Camille's email came through just before midnight. "Rachel, we might have a case. The audio note from your dad and the paper copy together create a strong argument of intent. It's not foolproof, but it's strong enough to send a cease and desist. Want to move forward?" I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I typed back just one sentence. "Let's begin." 3 days after I gave Camille the green light, she sent the notice. Not dramatic. Not threatening. Just sharp, concise, and utterly clear. A cease and desist addressed to my mother, formally requesting a pause on all transfers, developments, or renovations regarding the lake cabin. It included a copy of my father's handwritten note, a transcript of the audio file, and Camille's signature at the bottom. Professional. Legal. Cold. Just like them. I expected a phone call. Maybe even a screaming one. But what I got was silence. No reply. No message. No show of concern. Just a void. Which only told me one thing. They were scared. Not of me. Of exposure. A week later, I got a letter, not from my mother, but from her lawyer. Carefully worded, mildly patronizing, and laced with implication. They claimed I was misinterpreting my father's wishes. That verbal memories couldn't override legal documentation. That I was disturbing the peace of the estate. Peace? Where was this peace when they gave away my inheritance like a party favor? I let Camille handle the response. But inside, something shifted. I no longer wanted just the cabin back. I wanted the truth out. I wanted to break whatever illusion they'd created for the rest of the world, the perfect family, the smiling holiday cards, the curated warmth they only showed when it made them look good. So I started documenting everything. Emails, messages, photos, copies of old voicemails from Dad where he spoke about me with pride. The way he once told Eric to let Rachel lead, she's got the fire. They'd stolen more than a house. They'd tried to erase a legacy. I met with Camille again. She looked over my growing file and gave a slow, approving nod. This isn't just a dispute, she said. It's a pattern. A long one. And I want it all on record, I replied. Not just in court. I want people to see who they really are. Camille smiled, just slightly. Then we make this more than legal, she said. We make it visible. It was the first time in years I felt the weight lift off my chest. Not completely, but enough. Because now I wasn't just fighting for a piece of land. I was fighting to exist in the family that had always treated me like a ghost. Camille said the next part would be slow, procedural. Paperwork. Hearings. Delays. But I was ready. What I wasn't ready for was the poison my family would send in return. It started with a phone call from Aunt Sylvia, someone I hadn't spoken to in over a year. Rachel, honey, what are you doing? She asked, in a tone thick with concern and subtle judgment. Your mother says you're trying to take Eric's future away. The cabin's already in his name, isn't it? I closed my eyes. Of course, she'd called the extended family. Of course, she spun it as me being selfish. I'm standing up for what Dad wanted, I said calmly. He left it to me. It just wasn't filed properly. Aunt Sylvia sighed dramatically. But Rachel, stirring things up like this, it only causes pain. For everyone. There it was. The guilt grenade. Pulled. Tossed. I hung up without arguing. That same night, Eric posted a photo on social media, him and his fiancée standing outside the cabin, holding mugs, captioned, turning the old place into our dream home. He knew I'd see it. Every inch of that post was curated to provoke. The porch he stood on? I painted it when I was 16. The trail behind them? Dad and I hiked it every summer. The cabin wasn't just property. It was memory. They weren't building a dream home. They were burying mine. But instead of lashing out, I got quieter. Focused. I met Camille twice that week. We combed through paperwork, cross-referenced dates, even pulled bank records showing maintenance payments I'd made after Dad passed, proof that I'd helped keep the place up when no one else cared. Each line item, each photo, each scribbled note was another nail in their illusion. And then something unexpected happened. I found an email from Dad, dated 2 months before he died. Subject line, cabin title. Inside, don't let them change it. It's yours. You know why? My hand shook. Not because of what it said, but because I had forgotten he wrote it. I forwarded it to Camille immediately. She called 10 minutes later. This changes everything. Camille wasted no time. She filed an official petition with the county clerk to dispute the title transfer, attaching the email from Dad, the audio note, the unfiled handwritten will, and copies of every maintenance payment I'd made since his passing. She called it a challenge of intent with supplementary proof of original owner declaration. In simpler words, they gave away something they had no right to, and the court agreed to hear it. That's when the real cracks started to show. My mother didn't call. She sent a letter. Typed. Cold. Full of phrases like disruptive behavior, dishonoring the family legacy, and emotional instability. It was addressed not to me, but to Camille. As if I had become nothing more than a legal inconvenience. She claimed I was weaponizing grief. That I was always resentful and distant. That I was trying to rewrite history to suit a narrative of victimhood. But there was one sentence that made my stomach turn. Rachel has always needed help learning her place. We just didn't expect she'd force us to remind her. There it was. The truth. It had never been about oversight. Or a misunderstanding. It was control. From day one. I forwarded the letter to Camille. Her reply was curt. They've given us more than evidence. They've shown intent to erase. This helps us. But to me, it wasn't just evidence. It was fuel. That week, I met with a documentary editor I knew through a friend, someone who specialized in short-form digital storytelling. I handed her a folder of materials, old family photos, letters from my dad, the voice memo, the cabin's deed trail. She blinked in surprise. "You're putting this online?" she asked. "Not yet," I said. "But I want it ready." "Why?" I took a breath. "Because when I win, I want people to understand what it really cost." For years, I'd let them shape the story of who I was. The quiet one. The complicated one. The one who disappeared at holidays. They made me small so they could feel big. But now I had the power to narrate. Not with rage. With truth. And truth was louder than any lie they ever whispered behind closed doors. By February, the legal gears had begun turning. Camille submitted our full petition to the probate court. A formal hearing was scheduled, and I received a letter from the court clerk stamped with a date and a list of names notified. My mother, Eric, Marla. Every one of them would have to respond. In writing. On record. They couldn't hide behind silence anymore. What I hadn't anticipated was who would reach out next. My cousin Nina called me out of the blue. We hadn't spoken in years, mostly because Nina was always closer to Marla, or so I'd thought. "Rachel," she began, her voice low and nervous. "I know this is strange, but I saw what Eric posted about the cabin. And I remembered something." She paused. I waited. "You know that weekend before your dad passed? The one where he invited everyone up to the lake?" I nodded, though she couldn't see me. "Well, I was there. Just for one night. I remember him telling my mom and me that the cabin would go to you. He was very firm about it." My throat tightened. Nina continued. "We thought it was already settled. But when Eric said he got it, I assumed something changed. Now I think something was changed." She agreed to write a witness statement. It wasn't legally bulletproof, but it added another voice, one from within the family, who saw what I saw, remembered what I remembered. The walls were cracking. Later that week, Marla texted me, "You're making this uglier than it needs to be." I stared at her message for a while, then typed back, "You made it ugly when you smiled while I disappeared." She didn't reply. That weekend, I visited the cabin again. I wasn't supposed to go inside, not yet, but I stood at the edge of the frozen lake and remembered how Dad used to skip stones across the water, even in winter. This time, I wasn't just grieving. I was reclaiming. Camille called the next day. Her voice was steady. "We've got enough." The judge agreed to a pre-hearing conference. "They want everyone present." "Everyone?" I asked. "Everyone." I took a deep breath. "I'll be there." Because sometimes, justice isn't found in court filings or contracts. Sometimes it begins the moment you stop apologizing for existing. The courthouse smelled like old wood and cold coffee. Camille and I sat on one side of the long mahogany table. Across from us, my mother, Eric, and their attorney sat like a portrait, stiff, composed, hiding behind pressed suits and rehearsed expressions. Marla wasn't there. Of course she wasn't. I don't remember exactly what I expected, but seeing my mother in that room, something snapped. She wore her best pearls. Her hair was carefully curled. And when her eyes met mine, I didn't see regret. I saw calculation. The pre-hearing wasn't dramatic. No shouting. No confessions. It was all about intent, whether there was enough evidence to move forward with a formal challenge to the transfer. Their lawyer argued that my father's letter and audio didn't constitute a legal directive. Camille countered with the combination of the original will, the recorded testimony, the email, and Nina's written statement. Then she added a quiet bombshell. "We're prepared to call witnesses to Mr. Ferris's intent, including family members who were present when he expressed ownership wishes for the property." I watched my mother's jaw tighten. For the first time, something flickered behind her eyes, not fear, but discomfort. That things were no longer being spun in private shadows. That her version of the truth might not hold up under real light. After nearly 2 hours, the judge leaned forward and said the words I didn't dare hope for. "There is sufficient basis to consider the challenge credible." We'll move forward to a hearing. My hands were trembling under the table. Outside, I barely made it to the front steps before I exhaled. Camille touched my shoulder gently. This is just the beginning. But it's a good beginning. I nodded. I wanted to say thank you or cry or laugh, but I couldn't do any of it. I was too full of something new. Not anger. Not even relief. Power. Not power over them. Power over myself. Because now I wasn't just fighting to be heard. I was being heard in front of the very people who taught me to whisper. The hearing date was set for early April. But before we ever walked back into that courtroom, the unraveling began quietly, almost poetically. A former neighbor of my father's, Mr. Alden, a retired contractor, saw Camille's inquiry in a public notice. He contacted her directly, saying he had something important to share. He brought us receipts from 10 years ago, restoration work on the cabin's roof, plumbing fixes, and winter insulation. All commissioned and paid for by my father. But each of them listed my name as the designated owner in the invoices. Not legally binding, sure, but one more stitch in a long thread of evidence that the cabin had always been meant for me. And then came the tipping point. A video. Stored in a dusty old camcorder that Eric had dropped off at Aunt Sylvia's house years ago and forgotten about. She'd been cleaning out her garage and decided to check the contents before tossing it. The footage was dated March 9th, just 1 month before my father died. In it, he sat on the porch of the cabin, a plaid blanket over his knees, the lake glinting behind him. His voice was soft but clear. This cabin. I built this for peace. And Rachel gave me peace. Marla had her own world. Eric had his own path. But Ray, she brought me coffee on the bad days. She made this place feel like home. He smiled at the camera. His eyes crinkled at the corners. She'll keep it standing when I'm gone. I trust her. I sat frozen as Camille played the footage. Tears welled in my eyes, not just because of what he said, but because I could see it in his face. He meant it. Deeply. Fully. That night, Camille filed the video as evidence. The final blow came in the form of silence. A week before the hearing, Eric's lawyer contacted Camille. A proposal. Settle privately. Transfer the title back to me. No apology. No admission of wrongdoing. Just a quiet resolution. Cowards. They didn't want the truth on record. They didn't want my father's voice echoing in a courtroom. They wanted it to disappear, like they tried to do with me. Camille asked what I wanted to do. I stared at the message. At the words, settle privately. Then I shook my head. No, I said. We go to court. Because for once, I didn't just want what was mine. I wanted everyone to know how hard they tried to steal it. The courtroom was quiet, but I could feel the tension in every breath. My mother sat straight-backed in a gray blazer, eyes fixed ahead as if staring long enough could make her disappear from it all. Eric fidgeted in his seat, unable to look at me. Marla didn't show. She never had the stomach for confrontation, only for controlling it from afar. The judge entered and we all stood. Then it began. Camille led with calm confidence, presenting the evidence piece by piece. She didn't dramatize it. She didn't need to. The story spoke for itself. The voice memo, the email, the handwritten letter, the neighbors' invoices, and finally, the video. It was played in full. My father's voice filled the courtroom. I watched my mother flinch, not from guilt, but from the discomfort of being seen. Truly seen. Without the filters she had crafted her entire life. When it was over, the silence was deafening. Their attorney made a half-hearted attempt to question the validity of the footage, but the judge waved it off. I've heard enough. My heart stopped. Then came the ruling, swift, final, clean. The title would be transferred back to me. Their claim dismissed. Camille smiled at me. I didn't smile back. I didn't cry. I just breathed. Not the shaky breath of someone trying to hold it together. A full, complete inhale. As if the air was finally mine again. Outside the courthouse, the sun was just starting to set. The sky turned gold, then violet. I stood on the steps as people filtered out behind me, then disappeared. Eric passed me on the way to his car. He paused, looked like he wanted to say something. But I beat him to it. I hope you find peace, I said quietly. But don't ever mistake my silence for forgetting. He nodded, barely, then left. I never saw him again. Later that week, I drove to the cabin. This time, I had the keys. This time, I walked inside like I belonged, because I did. I lit a fire in the old hearth, took out Dad's favorite mug, sat in his old chair, pulled a blanket around my shoulders, and watched the snow fall through the window. I didn't feel triumphant or bitter. I felt whole. Because they lied. They manipulated. They tried to erase me. And still, I remained. Not in spite of them. Beyond them.